And we will have some more joining us, but I do want to go ahead and get started so I can respect everyone's time. Last time we got started a little later because of audio issues, but I think we're good on that this time. So with that, we're going to get started on session 4, which is titled Building Communities, Learning Activities, and Learner Interaction. This is the 4th session that we've talked about so far. Along the way, we've hit on a number of different topics, but this week or this time, we're going to focus on 4 main topics, and those are basically ensuring learning activities promote the learning objectives, and it should be stated. I keep finding my own errors. Of the stated learning objectives, making sure that the learning activities provide opportunities for interaction of different types, and we're going to talk about different types of interaction along with active learning. And then we're going to talk about developing a plan of interaction with the learners during the course and explaining expectations for learners. So with that, we're going to get started into this week's content. And before we do so, this is the slide that I said that I want to expand on what Melissa was talking about. Before we get ready to dive into the bulk of the content, I want to go back and highlight some of the different discussions that have taken place from the very beginning. If you are just joining us this week and you hadn't participated prior to that, we are excited to have you and want to let you know that there's lots of great things that we've already talked about. And even better than that, if you go into, so each session we've created some different activities, because in the beginning we talked about how we wanted to simulate an online course during this process, but we wanted to try to do so in a way that didn't really take away all your time from what you're doing and what you have going on, but give you a chance to kind of grow and develop through the process and the concepts of what we're talking about. So with that, I really suggest, if you haven't, even if you don't take time to comment, to go back into session 1. There are 4 different discussion forums in there that are based on the items that we talked about in the very beginning. And there's some very powerful conversations that are happening between your colleagues across the institution in terms of, where we stand. One of the topics I highlighted, I saw a lot, was the 2-minute test we talked about, how certain faculty have done a 2-minute test of their own course and kind of added some thoughts. I know one said that they wanted to add some more video. I can't remember all those off the top of my head, but I did take some time, and I had been promising that I would go back and comment on those. And I did for sessions 2, 3, and 4, but to be honest, there was such good content in session 1 that I spent more of my time and focus on reading the interactions that were occurring between faculty, and found that those self-reflections, those self-assessments were really helping to start shape some of this process that we're talking about. So I wanted to highlight that first. I also want to talk about the last session we did was instructional materials, and this one's supposed to be focused on instructional activities. But when we get into certain parts of today's presentation, you're going to find that there's a convergence of both of those together, and how we can use that to really drive the design of our courses with little to no impact over time. So I want to talk about that as we move forward. So let me go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about what learning activities are, especially when it comes to higher education. There can be a fine line between what is a learning activity or an assessment, and something can fit into both categories. An item can be both an activity, and an assessment. So according to Quality Matters, inside of course, you should incorporate interaction, which promotes learner achievement of the objectives by actively engaging the learner with the course content. Now, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, because prior to when I was at Mitchell before, I worked as the Director of Distance Education at Western Piedmont Community College. And at that time, we were in the heart of the QEP process and the SACS reaffirmation. And so we as an institution had chosen active learning as our very basic topic for our QEP. And of course, you know, SACS comes in and evaluates everything that you have in play. And one of the things that really resonated to me in those conversations that we had were that the representatives from the SACS team we were sent really challenged the fact that you could actually have active learning occur in an online course. And so when I heard those conversations and when they challenged us with that, I took it personally and kind of, you know, went into what kinds of things can we do in an online course to make it active, engaging for the learners and so forth. And so based on that and the work I've done over the last few years, we're going to talk about some of that in this session today. And we're going to show that you can promote and have active learning and engaging learning occurring inside of a blended or an online course. And so, you know, the activities should be varied in order to provide reinforcement and mastery in multiple ways. It shouldn't just be the same thing every module after module after module. Students will get to the point where they just kind of disengage and turn off if it's repetitive. So inside of the term learning activities, that can include a variety of discussions and simulations and practice quizzes, like your formative assessments, your tests, case studies. Case studies, there's lots of opportunities there. I could do a whole entire session on case studies and started to add more of that to today's session, but I didn't because I wanted to make sure I was able to cover everything. So I know, like, we have several different medical opportunities at Mitchell Community College. We have nursing and we have, you know, all those medical programs that we have. And you have case studies that you can go in and find where they give statistics and information on patients and certain characteristics in terms of symptoms is what I'm trying to get to. And so you could stop that and have, you know, students fill in the gaps, or given the knowledge they have, what, you know, medicines, there's endless possibilities there. But role playing, student presentations, and even labs, like there's an example of a lab inside. Now, of course, the lab you would see in the picture on this slide would be more of a face-to-face thing, but you could also integrate something like that into a video and use that video into your course. But we're going to talk about how we can look at creating some of these different items and tie that to the learning materials and the course objectives. So we're first going to spend some time on defining and looking at concepts. And so the first of those is interaction. And there are three main types of interaction. Those are student to content, student to teacher, and student to student. So let's look at those more in depth. So when I talk about, I call it SCI, student content interaction, is, you know, this describes the way in which learners interact with the instructional materials in a course. That could be reading, listening, watching. Includes doing things like designing concept maps or diagramming, working through simulations and tutorials, case-based learning that I was talking about, reflections, and then quizzes, as long as they are low impact and provide immediate feedback or useful feedback. So there's a difference between the two. So if I'm doing a post-assessment or a unit or module exam, that's not necessarily a type of activity that would fit within the context of a student to content interaction. The next thing we're going to talk about from SCI is STI, and that is student-teacher interaction. And this describes the various ways in which instructors connect directly with students regularly and timely throughout a course. And so it can include individual email messages, synchronous individual or group chats, live virtual class sessions, discussion forum responses, other types of feedback. So so I've been teaching CIS 110 this spring, and I've had some really good interactions with students, both through individual emails and through weekly announcements. So I didn't put announcements on here, but that using the announcement feature inside of Moodle, you have the ability to interact that way with your students as a teacher. And so I've been each week posting at the beginning of a week. I try to do it on Mondays. Go in and say, okay, here's, we did some good stuff last week. Here's what we're starting this week, and kind of give a walkthrough of where to go and what to do, what items are due, when they're due by, and all that type of stuff. So that's included in student to teacher interaction. So the students need to see that you're present inside of that online course, and that's where the some of the active and engaging learning takes place. The final one we're going to talk about is student to student interaction. And so that describes the various ways in which students connect with their classmates through a course. And it can include any of these. So students can email each other individually or in groups. This includes your synchronous individual or group chats, your virtual live class sessions, discussion forum responses, other types of feedback, and then collaborative web tools if you use those. And so you'll find one of the things with me personally, I don't get into the tool itself. So when I say that, like a lot of people say, yeah, like I got to find a Web 2.0 tool to integrate into this. And so with me, it's the opposite. Like, here's a concept, here's the project idea, here's the activity and the materials. How do I bring those together? So I may need to go look for a tool to do that, but I don't look for the tool first. I start with the concept, and then I figure out, most of the time there's lots of really good opportunities and options built into Moodle already that I can use, but sometimes I may need to go out to do that. So interaction can take place in those. Next, from interaction, we're going to go into types of presence. So there are three main types of presence that occur within the online course setting. And so this is what they refer to as the community of inquiry, if you're not familiar with it. But those are social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. And so when I get to the first one, I want to spend a little bit of time on social presence, because a little bit ago I talked about the powerful conversations that have taken place in the session 1 discussion forums based on the questions that were provided and the content that was presented. And one of those, we did talk very high level, very briefly, about the three types of presence. And in one of the readings that I had listed on the page and based the discussion questions on, the book, and I forget which one of the 5 off the top of my head it is. I had it in my notes and I don't have those in front of me right now. But it talked about social presence from the angle of almost being like me needing to share my entire personal life with my students. And while personalizing things is a piece of it, that is not what this social presence is all about. Now, taking my life experiences and integrating those into my teaching, that's a big piece of social presence. Like, am I there? Am I in the middle of the conversation? Am I watching to see how it goes and changing things if they're guided? So social presence can tie into teaching presence a little bit, which is what we'll go to in just a minute. But this includes creating and building trust and respect with students throughout a course, developing opportunities to build community and sense of belonging and purpose, and promoting open conversation that fits within predetermined etiquette guidelines. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. So it has to do with kind of facilitating a course and putting your own personal twist on it. Doesn't have to be limited to, when you introduce yourself, you share your entire personal and professional history. That the book explained it that way, but there's far more to social presence than just that. Cognitive presence ties back to student to content and even teacher to content interactions, and it involves providing various opportunities to critically think about and analyze content-related course materials. It also includes constructing meaning through sustained communication. So you're not just reading the content and then answering some multiple choice or true, false, or matching questions. You're actually taking the content that you've read and applying it through critical conversations, critical analysis of different types of activities which we're going to talk more about since we are basing this session on the learning activities. So cognitive presence is something, need time to reflect on the material, not just read it and move on. And then finally, teaching presence, which again converges both of these together between the social and the cognitive. And so teaching presence brings the social, cognitive, presence aspects together by the process of you selecting course content and designing the course as part of teaching presence, but also facilitating written or spoken communication throughout the course and providing direct instruction through a variety of ways. That could be a recorded video, that could be some text in an announcement, that can be different things. So we're going to talk about some of those as we move forward. So we've now defined interaction and presence. The last thing I'm going to do, this first part of this is very presentation-like because I'm just kind of hitting the main details, and then we're going to start digging into some content. The final thing that I want to talk about is netiquette versus online etiquette and how they play an important part in this. If I go back to my 4 topics for this session about how we have to set the expectations for interaction in the course and then promote safe, equitable, reflective environment. And so netiquette expectations are primarily focused on asynchronous discussion, while etiquette is focused more on live virtual course discussions, meetings that take place via video conferencing software. And so depending on your unique situation, depending on how your course is structured, you may need to have plans in place for both items. You may need to have some information that you share and set expectations in terms of netiquette for asynchronous discussion forums or online conversation tools that you use. But then if you integrate collaborate sessions into your course, then you're also going to have to talk about the items that we're going to address in etiquette. And those are both laying the groundwork for both expectations and setting up the environment we're looking for. Whoops, so I skipped ahead, so let me go back. Maybe if I can get back, I got one more with that slide, and it's not wanting to go back. So I'll go from here, and then I'll go back and look at it in a minute. So we'll start with basic netiquette. There we went. It's jumping around on me. So netiquette and etiquette are both concepts that need to be addressed when setting expectations for student to student and student to teacher interaction. Because with this, with setting up discussion forums, I've talked about it before, in a virtual online session, the likelihood that a teacher is leading that conversation from start to finish is very high most of the time. But in discussion forums, we don't always think of that. But it is very important for the instructor to be in that conversation in the forum, one, to make sure that misconceptions are corrected and directed in the right way, but also to ensure that the conversation stays respectful, that there's not an overbearance or other type of issues that might come up in that discussion. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the netiquette piece, and all of a sudden my presentation's wanting to skip on me, so there we go. Basic netiquette tips. The following list includes, and so with these netiquette and etiquette tips, I want to refer back to the information that Melissa sent out last week. She sent out 2 different pieces, one article or website on netiquette tips and another one on etiquette. So this information was pulled from those 2 resources. It is available in the information that we share with you all. But so when we talk about basic expectations for netiquette, we want to talk about proper use of grammar and spelling. Clarity is key. Make sure you're precise, not just rambling on. Avoid texting, language, and emojis. Provide evidence to support your opinion. Cite your sources. It's very important. Like, there are some times where we may have, depending on the purpose of the discussion, you may have more of the 4th bullet point or you may have less. Sometimes you want it to be that informal conversation. But even when it's informal, you still want to make sure that responses are clear and avoid the, you want to look at your grammar, everything else like that. Above and beyond all, you want to recognize and respect diversity and control your temper, and you want to review the work before submitting. So these are expectations for students. Oftentimes, we talk about sending an email in the heat of the moment. You may get an email and all of a sudden it's got you really frustrated, and you want to just real quick type a response and hit send. But the suggestion is you step back a little bit, give it some time, go back and look at it again and think about it and reflect before you submit. And that's those are some of the powerful positives to asynchronous communication, is that they give us time to step back and reflect and everything else. So with bullet point number 4, if you're giving a more academic-based assignment or learning activity that you've put together for a discussion forum, you're going to expect a more detailed, high-level response, because students have that amount of time to go out, do the research, put their thoughts together, write about them, and then submit their response versus a live synchronous session. So that's a difference in expectation. And let's see if I can get to etiquette. Whoop. It may skip ahead here. So basic etiquette tips. Whoop, it did. So hold on. So in this, it's recommended that you join early. And, we're a year into it now. We hopefully don't have to address the next 3 as much as we did when it very first started. But you want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. Be aware of your surroundings, everything behind you that's in view of the camera. A lot of the video conferencing tools now have filters that are available for participants or presenters, either one. So that would be students and instructors. And make sure your mic is muted when not talking. So those are 4 of the main etiquette pieces. You want to make sure, like, if you have to have your camera on and you're in that type setting, you want to stay seated and kind of focus on your movements and try to stay, you don't want to be jumping all over the place and moving all over the place. And you want to be present in the conversation. You want to minimize any distractions around when possible. So you want to make sure you should have these, scheduled well in advance so students know and can prepare. We all have different things going on at home, different people, different animals, different things in the background. So, plan for that. Give everyone grace and recognize and respect diversity. There are situations where, we still have plenty of kids that aren't in school during the day. So we have kids and things going on in the background. We have to be able to recognize that. We can't eliminate all those situations, and we can't let it control our activities that we have going on. And then finally, create an agenda and set boundaries. This has to do with start time, end time, making sure you respect everyone's time, have topics to cover, and keeping things organized. So some of those have to do with the instructor, and then some have to do with students, and some have to do with both. Of course, the very last one is more focused on the instructor. The next to last one is a little bit of both, and then of course all the top 5 are targeted towards both. So putting it all together, what do learning activities that are aligned to student learning objectives and module unit level objectives look like? Let's take a look together to see how we can integrate open educational resource content into our courses to accomplish this task. And so this is where I'm going to move away from a formal presentation type setting to hopefully open up some opportunities for exploration, for some conversation, discussion, and just see what we can come up with. So let me minimize the presentation for just a minute. I will show you, I'll bring it up here for a minute, but I'll show you that it's in the course as well. I have a list of items that I want to go through and show you various aspects to that we're about to talk about. And this is focused specifically on open educational textbooks. So we're talking OER, but I'm focusing this conversation today on just textbooks primarily, not individual independent resources. So let me take just a second to switch gears. As I'm doing so, I want to check the chat real fast, and I want to see if there's anyone that has Any questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns at this point in time before I get to the next piece? All right, and I don't see anything, so we're ready to continue. So this is the fun part. This is the part that I'm the most excited about. So I've spent a lot of time going in to find some really good, high-quality resources to share with you all today that hit a number of different areas. I think that each of you will find something that you can use in the next part that I'm going to talk about. And so with that, this is where the conversation between learning materials and learning activities are going to kind of converge together. So if you go into the online course design course inside of Moodle and go down to session 4, in the middle of the page, there's some readings, but below that, you'll see information on open educational resources and more specifically OER textbooks. And there's a long list, and I've put some different I've tried to highlight the key pieces of each, and I could in no way, shape, or form capture everything until I show you some of what I'm going to show you. But you can see like OpenStax that I'll show first is specifically tied to math, science, social studies, humanities, business, and college success. But if you get down into some of the other resources I want to share, like BCC Campus, you've got topics covered like health and medical. You've got topics covered like hospitality and tourism, trades, electrical, hairstyling. I know we have the hairstyling and all that type stuff at Mitchell. So there's some textbooks that go along with that, plumbing, professional cooking. And so we'll get into those and look at those and see how you can start integrating those into your course. I want to start with OpenStax for a minute. I want to actually go into that resource and show you some of the key things about it. Now, some of these have more than others in terms of supplemental materials. And so when I talk about supplemental materials, and I'm zoomed really far in for some reason, all right, just to make sure, Melissa, are you still hearing me? Am I still connected?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see what's going on with OpenStax here, because it should be working. Maybe we'll come back to it. Nope, none of them are working. Hold on. I hope my connection's not about to go down. Let me hold on just one second. I want to turn my camera off and hardwire myself real quick in case the connection's about to go down. All right, should be back. All right, Melissa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, let's try this again. So if I click on OpenStax, and here we go, it's starting to open now. It'll take just a minute to load. Possibly. All right, it'll take a minute for the connection to come up. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about first is that some of the concerns that come up when we start having the conversation about open educational resources is one, the quality of those resources often tends to be a concern. Two, the reliability, and when I say reliability, I mean, is it going to change? How much is it going to change? You know, am I constantly going to have to change? All those type things are all concerns that are issues.
Chris, do you
y'all
want me to
getting-
share my screen?
it should be working now. Hold on, let me see. Yeah, you may have to for time aspect. I'm not sure what's going on. Are you hearing an echo for me too, Melissa?
No.
Okay, maybe I'm just hearing myself. Let me try this one more time. Let me go into a different one and see if it's going to work more than that one. But where I was going with that is that those are legitimate concerns, but the materials that I want to show you today, I really am not sure what's going on, that I have the connection but it won't bring the pages up. Do you have an opportunity to share your screen, Melissa? There we go. All right, so Melissa's sharing. So I want to kind of talk Melissa through this and let her guide the way. So if you'll go into find your subject area, Melissa, the button there in the bottom left corner, there you'll see little like cards that show you the different options that are available in terms of textbooks. And so if you go down through, you've got tabs across the top, you've got categories down the page where you can view all. But if you'll scroll down just a little bit, one of the ones I want to highlight in this group, Melissa, is the anatomy and physiology course, because I know that we teach some different anatomy and physiology items. So in science, we're going to click on anatomy and physiology. When it comes up, you have a menu on the left that you can look at that gives you all kinds of different options. You can download the entire text as a PDF. Students can order a print copy of the textbook. But what I want to go down to, if you'll scroll down on that page you're on, Melissa, is you'll see a list of contributing authors, senior authors. If you look at that list, you'll see that you have professors, instructors, adjuncts from community colleges, from universities, all across the country, and sometimes even spread throughout the world. You'll also see a date of when the content was originally published, and you'll see a date of when the web version was last updated. So while we're looking at this item, and right now it shows that it was published in 2013, the original thought is, well, that content's all out of date and everything, so why would I use it? But because this tool is the way that it is, you can see that the web version of the textbook was last updated 2 months ago. And so it's very up to date. Now, you see the buttons right above there that show the suggestions, suggest a correction, and the errata list or the error lists. And so with those things, what is it? It's set up in a dynamic way that maybe they found a punctuation error, maybe there's a spelling error, maybe a sentence wasn't correct with a certain like subject matter content. So those are adjustable and able to be fixed. They're not changing like massive amounts of content within the textbook. They're changing simple things. And then of course you can see the different versions that are available, like hardcover and print and different things like that. But it does give you the attribution or the license for it. It shows that it is Creative Commons, that you can use it in your course. Pretty much that's saying as long as you're not selling it to make money off of it, which students do pay to come to enroll in courses, but that's different than what we're talking about here. We're not adding it to a course, selling the course to someone else to use. So with that being said, one of the things I want to talk about with this particular resource, if you'll scroll back up towards the top, Melissa, is that I picked anatomy and physiology for a couple different reasons to highlight in OpenStax. First is one of the big topics that we just heard a presentation on. Phil was one of the people that presented on it, was the different, reaching different types of students in different ways, culturally responsive content, different things like that. What I was really interested in and what I saw, and I'm not going to show it in the presentation today, but the images within this textbook, within this anatomy and physiology textbook, address a variety of culturally responsive content. For example, we've all taken a health course before, and this is the reason why I'm not going to share it. And you see the diagrams of a human that show inside the arteries, the veins, and the inside workings of a human. And so in most of those, if you think about most of the textbooks we've seen over time, you have a white male or a white female that are in those images. But one of the things that this anatomy and physiology textbook does really well is it has different types of people represented inside of those diagrams. So it's not just the same look and feel of a human as it's going through the different aspects of anatomy and physiology. It is looking at different types of humans, and so they do the culturally responsive content really well inside of the course. If you'll click on instructor resources, Melissa, it'll show you all kinds of different things that go along. There's a Moodle course cartridge that goes along with this particular resource, and we're not going to go dig into how all that works right now, but there's some course cartridges that go along with it. It has test questions that go along with it that you can integrate. And so you can use, one of the things I meant to say before we started getting into these is I started talking about when we have the conversation about open educational resources, I hit on the top 2 points, but I forgot the third one. So the first point that I said was the quality of it. And then, the second part was about how often it's changing and all that type stuff. And the third thing is that most people, when they start this open educational resource adventure, the first thing they try to do is find something that fits exactly the way that they need it to. And you're not going to find that. The chances are, if you're using a paper-based paid textbook to present content to your students, it's most likely not got exactly everything you're looking for either. So this is going to be a mix and a match of resources. You can use a chapter from one of these textbooks and link it in different ways within your course, and then go to another textbook and use that. So if you'll scroll up just a minute, Melissa, go back to, let's look at student resources real quick with this one. And you can see that there's a pronunciation guide that they can download. There's some different resources, time management guide that's, some different things to help give some information on reading and note taking and getting started in the course and working with the course content. That is specific to the resource. But I do want to highlight a couple things. So if you'll go back up, Melissa, to the left to book details and go down to table of contents under get the book. And there is a fully interactive web-based version, so you can see down the left side all the way through. And I'm going to highlight the reason why I wanted to do this part is at the end of chapter 1, or at the end of any chapter, you can see there are review questions and there are critical thinking questions. Let's click on critical thinking questions. Okay, because the focus of this session today is primarily on learning activities, but I have to present the learning materials to show you how to get to the learning activities. So with that, you have a series of questions here, 28 through 37. If I'm an instructor and I've just taught this unit or this module in the course, these questions are very powerful. Several of these are great questions to either have in a discussion forum activity or to pull out and have some kind of written response or even video response. So like question 30, name the 6 levels of organization of the human body. That would be one that you could take out and use, say, hey, create quickly a guided tour of the human body that show the 6 levels of organization. Different things that you can kind of go into with those aspects. Now, it's subject by subject in terms of what the questions are, the content is, and so forth. So I do want to go back, click the review questions, Melissa, if you don't mind to do that. It's back over on the left. Go back to table of contents and we'll do review questions. So this is where you get into some of the multiple choice questions. There is a teacher guide that they give you the answer key to these. They have a chapter review already built in. There's some interactive questions. So there's an interactive link question. So if you'll click that, go to the table of contents on the left, Melissa. Oh, click it one more time. It'll bring it back up, and then scroll down to right above where you have clicked so far. There's an interactive links question right there. There we go. And so with this is these are some questions they have to answer, but they have videos that are built in that students have to watch, and then based on the video, then they have to go in and respond. So when we talk about creating different types of activities, there's already in this resource, if I choose to use like this textbook, then I have all the stuff already set up. I just got to decide how I'm going to use it. Like maybe, and I don't want to pick all 5 of these and all 10 of the others and, you know, all 15 of the review questions, because then I'm overwhelming the content. But I can pull these out and create discussion forums. I can pull these out and center a synchronous video discussion around 1 or 2 of these questions. I can create different learning activities in my course, and the content's already there. So with that, when I go back to those 3 points that I said in the beginning, you know, the concern is, well, what if the content changes? Well, that's where we have to look at the way that we're designing assignments. If we're designing assignments that are really based for, or learning activities, if we're designing learning activities that are basically read and regurgitate, meaning you read a passage, you read an article, you read a chapter, and then you take a multiple choice quiz or tests, then yes, you're going to have to worry about the content changing. But the activities we want to design are outside of that realm. We're talking like, okay, so I gave you some base knowledge. So what, a sentence or 2 of the content changed because maybe there were some, you know, breakthroughs in that subject matter, or that concept changed a little bit. You go back to, is Pluto a planet or is it not a planet? You got that type thing. But you design your questions and your activities around a concept that it doesn't matter if the small little pieces of the text change, they're still reflecting on a major concept that can be done regardless of whether 2 sentences become 3 or 1 becomes 5 or 5 become 2. When there are those small changes in the content, if the activities are designed a specific way, it's not going to matter from semester to semester if there's little changes in the content. So spent a lot of time on this anatomy and physiology textbook in OpenStax. There's lots of other opportunities in there, math, science, social studies, humanities, business, college. So let's go back. Click on OpenStax up there in the top left corner, Melissa. And I just want to go down through that list because it does have I just wanted to show some of those specific textbooks within those. So click Find Your Subject one more time for me, please. And you see that there's algebra, algebra 2, there's multiple levels. There's algebra and trigonometry, pre-calc, calculus, 1, 2, 3, statistics, all kinds of different. And the key thing about this too, I mentioned the culturally responsiveness, but these are also all designed intentionally to be accessible. So all the content that's in there is not only responsive to culture and diversity, but it's also accessible in terms of in your math textbooks, you know, it's written in math language that a screen reader could read. There's a Success in College book in there. There's a couple, of course, there's some high school books at the bottom, but most of the rest of them in the course are designed specifically to serve as college textbooks. There's one on business law and essentials that's just above that college success right there. So business law is covered, intellectual property, entrepreneurship, principles of management. So there's some other topics inside there, business ethics, that we could really use. You may use part of those in a different type of course. But I want to go on to some of the other resources. Let me try and see if mine will load before I go in there. And while I'm doing that, did anyone see anything in there that you think you might be able to use? Like just looking at the titles of textbooks, not digging into them. my goal and hope was that we spend a little bit of time here in a minute just giving you like 10 minutes or so to explore. Let's see what I'm doing here. So Mark says he already uses the U.S. history books. Any comments on how you found that to be helpful? Pluses, negatives, anything like that? Any comments you'd like to share, Mark?
Yeah, I found the U.S. history books from OpenStax to be very professionally constructed. You know, it's done by college professors, and the collateral materials are great. There's even templates for the PowerPoints, and there's quiz banks. So it's probably one of the easiest ways to actually adopt a course and use it without charging students for a textbook.
Exactly, and that's what I found too. And so I think that, you know, from the stories, and Deshaun shared that for Bio 111, Bio 112, they're already using OpenStax and they're contemplating the anatomy and physiology. It may be that it may be again that you'll see some today that you hadn't come across or hadn't found before, that you might be, you know, good to use. But for the most part, the resources that I'm going to show you today fit into the same category as what Mark just said. They are written by college professors. They're not just kind of halfway put together and tossed out there. They are available through major colleges and universities. A lot of higher educational institutions have gone to the movement of trying to get away of students having to pay so much for textbooks because it is such a limitation. Catherine, did you have something you wanted to say?
She might be muted.
Okay, sorry. I hit the raise hand by accident, but I've used the OERs for PE before. The University of Georgia has some really good ones on volleyball and walk, jog, run.
Okay, Melissa, I may have to have you go back to sharing your screen. I really don't know. Last time it was the audio. Today, I guess it's going to be the web. Of course, it's saying there's no connection yet, that we're still having a conversation and you can still see me. So who knows what's going on there.
That's fine. Just let me know what to do.
If I want to skip down to, let's skip down to a minute to the BC campus one, next to the last one on the list, BC campus open textbooks, because this is the one that's going to get into the wide variety of stuff that's outside the norm. Tony, that is a legitimate concern, but with most of these, that's another thing that with what I'm sharing today, with most of what these are today, you're not going to run into that because they have been reviewed, peer reviewed, and put up there. So these, they'll add to the collections, but they're not going to pull them down for the most part. Now, depending on like a major change in information in the subject area, that could be something that would happen, but most of the resources that I've linked to today you're not going to run into that as much. All right, so there we go. So I did want to highlight, so on this, you come to the search at the top, but if you scroll down to the bottom just a little bit, then you get into, okay, scroll up just a minute. Okay, so go to use open textbooks. So if you, that's what I'm looking for right there. And then the tab at the top, browse our collection. If you use the link inside the Moodle course, it should take you straight to the browser collection. I believe this is where you'll scroll down just a little bit. There's some guides that they have available that kind of walk you through if you're new to how to use the open educational resources and different things like that, that you can kind of use those. I think it goes into some of the, you know, which ones are quality versus not. I'm trying to think. Let's see, where's... So scroll up just a little bit, Melissa, because it should be BC Campus, browse our collection. Find open textbooks over on the left. That's the last thing we need to click, and then we'll be where I'm trying to get to. So over on the left at the top of the menu, it says find open textbooks. Okay, so I wanted to highlight, and calculus comes up first. I wanted to highlight this because the green labels at the bottom of each section, and you can see that it tells you off the top that if it's been reviewed or not. It's marked as accessible. It tells you before you go any further into it if it includes supplementary materials. Again, that includes like presentations, different things like that. And then it tells you when it was last updated, the title of it, the main authors, and so forth, and a brief description. You can get all that before you ever find. But if you go over to the left and scroll down, you can see the high-level subject areas. But go down to trades for me, if you wouldn't mind, Melissa. And inside of trades, that's where you find the electrical, the hairstylist, the plumbing, professional cooking. So let's go into professional cooking, professional cook. And so I know we offer some culinary arts programs at Mitchell. And so, you know, this may be an option. I don't know anything about that area or the subjects that are taught or the topics that are taught, but you have multiple options in terms of, you know, basic kitchen and food service management, modern pastry and plated desserts techniques. Let's go into the food service management at the top, the very top option, Melissa. Let's go ahead and explore that one a little bit, please, if you don't mind. So inside of here, of course, over on the right, you have some options: readable, editable, buy hard copy, supplemental materials. Let's look at what supplementary materials are available. And I haven't checked these out yet. So you have some a website that comes along with it, and then a test bank that you can request to access and edit. But in terms of the book itself, if you go to readable, you'll find that it's in multiple formats. And so let's go to the website where it says read this book online. So you can actually go in and you can download a copy of the entire book, but you can actually go through and click the read book button and kind of read through the content. So you can actually link directly to specific pieces or pages or chapters throughout the book that you can integrate into your course. So I wanted to, instead of going into each of these in detail like I'm doing, I wanted to take about the next 5 to 10 minutes max for each of you to go in and access those resources. I'll put a copy of the links in the chat. I want you to kind of explore. Those of you that are already using OER resources currently, maybe you can just put a couple things in there about, you know, what you have found to be beneficial, or what are the concerns that you've had from using them. If you are not currently using an OER resource in terms of a textbook, look at the labels. And this is not meant to be a deep, in-depth, but I want you to explore pick one of these and explore just a little bit to go in and see, look at a textbook, look at what it offers, look at the questions, and see if there's some things that you think might be promising for you as you're looking at this as an option for your course and thinking about your own course design and learning activities. So let's do that for the next 5 to 10 minutes. You can add a new tab if you're inside of Collaborate. If you go up in the toolbar at the top where the address bar is, above that you can click the plus sign in your web browser and add a new tab to the top. And I'll get these dropped in the chat real quick so you can click on those links instead of having to try to navigate out to the course right now. So I'll do them one at a time. We'll go with OpenStax first. Yeah, Mark shared one of the resources he is using. So if you have that and you want to share it, if you're already using one, please feel free to share that as well. So if I've included all of them in there. I have the BC Campus, I have Lyrics, Sailor, Open Textbook, Milne, which is now SUNY. It was SUNY, but it's now called Milne Open Textbooks, OER Open Textbooks, and then OpenStax. So take a minute to look at those for a second.
Chris, really quickly, how ADA compliant are these resources?
So So Paul, when they say that they're accessible, that's primarily what they are talking about. So when we say that college faculty have put these together and that they have to go through in order to get that accessible stamp that's on there, that notification, that means that they've met the WCAG, the WCAG or however you say it, 2.0 or higher standards that would be used, whether you're looking at a VPAT or different things like that. So when they say they're accessible, they are configured so that they have, I tested the alternative text inside of multiple textbooks, OpenStax, all that type of stuff. So when they've developed those, they actually, some of those faculty that you'll see on the list in terms of authors, that is their main purpose and contribution to the project, is that they, you know, they have the videos that I found that were used already had the captions included. The images had the alternative text. The math text was added as text-based latex language that can be used inside of a screen reader versus screenshots of text and embedded stuff. So all of these, they're definitely the ones that are marked accessible, but in order for them to be added into most of these repositories, they have to have at least met that standard before they'll be considered in terms of being added. So there's definitely a big focus that has been put on ADA compliance in developing these textbooks that I've shared today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. And Mark has put some awesome information in terms of what the history department has done with these open educational resources and the calculations that they've put out there in terms of how much money. You think about it, you know, one textbook costs $63. So I want to talk about that in terms of CIS 110, because this is where I want to go with part of this conversation. So we went through this whole entire, I'm teaching a section of CIS 110 this semester, partially because we wanted to go through this whole entire process with that course and see what options are viable. So I've looked out there. If you're not familiar with the way that CIS 110 works, there are two different pieces to the course. There's what I call basic PC literacy. That's all about the operating system, hardware, software, file storage, communication, that type stuff. And then there's a whole entire other piece that's on Microsoft, Windows 10, and Office 2019 specifically. And so there are some courses, just like CIS 110, that depending on the situation of the college or the institution and the course itself, do not lend itself to what we're talking about today. Now, the VLC did develop a CIS 110 course that was sent out in an email by Melissa with some other resources, where it does not rely on a textbook. It is open source and is available for any of the institutions to use at will. But after looking at that, is the content in it up to date? Yes, it is. Is it quality, and would it be usable in its current form? Yes, it would. There would have to be some tweaks. But we have to think about a couple different things with that course specifically. One, Windows 10 has been out there for a while. So how soon will Windows 10 be replaced by Windows whatever comes after Windows 10? Office 2016 came about, then Office 2019, Office 365. Microsoft Office is a moving target, so that changes. And so while I said in some other, like if I go back to the anatomy and physiology course, you know, some basic, I talked about the 1 to 5 sentence change. That's just a way of saying, like, you know, some basic content changes, the wording throughout. But when we talk about using a piece of software, whether it be the Adobe suite, if you're in a, you know, graphics design program type thing, or photography courses with editing and different things like that, there are some situations where you come about, like, it doesn't make the most sense to try to do this right now with CIS 110 because the factor of those things might change. That VLC course is not dynamic. It will not change with the, you know, if Windows 10 goes away and something replaces it, it will be up to the institution itself to update that part of it. If Windows, you know, if Microsoft Office updates to a newer version, it will be up to the individual institution to update it. And so at this current time, only adjunct faculty teach CIS 110. So then it would be up to, an adjunct faculty member to make sure that they maintain that course all the way through. And there are other courses that are offered at Mitchell that fall into that same category. But as Mark mentioned, like the history department itself has taken courses, the basic entry-level history courses, and looking at the numbers so don't get, so History 111, for example, which is your common course that, everyone's going to have, and they've actually, gone through. And so that makes the most sense in that situation, that they've reduced the cost in that way. So it's not always, adequate at times. The other thing that we have to bring into this conversation while you're finishing up reviewing the resources is timing. And so this is not something that takes place overnight. This is something that takes some time. So you could be working on it one semester. Like maybe I'm working on all this and looking at all the resources and kind of putting it together this spring to launch in the fall. Maybe some work over the summer, some don't. Keeping that out of this picture. But the other thing that I brought up in this conversation is that we've already had to have our information in for fall textbook adoptions as early as February and March of this spring. And so in doing that, say I decide to go with one of these options, that's really, really early to have that conversation. I need some additional time if I'm going to go through and move through with this process. So there are some conversations that we need to have at a higher level, when we start going down this path. But the focus of this session today is to make sure that everyone understands that there are some very, very high quality, professionally written, open textbooks out there that have the content available to where you don't have to spend all of your time trying to write your own test questions, trying to, design your own topics for discussion forums or your projects. Like, the concepts are there, the information's there. It's just how you want to design it for students to actively engage in it. What kinds of responses do you want from students? So you've had some time to explore the resources. I don't want to take all the way till 3:30. I do want to make sure that we talk about just a couple other things really fast before we're finished. But did anyone find anything that jumped out at them as something you want to explore a little more while you were exploring during that time? Anyone have any specific questions or concerns about what you found? Yes, David, there are several books in that area that you could look at. And again, I look at them as a high level from what I know of the subject matter. I'm not a subject matter expert. That is where you all come in. I know educational technology and instructional design. Yes, Phil, I was thinking of you when I saw the lyrics resource, because there are several economics related textbooks in there. So I know there's another one that has several, there's some other people that I was going to recommend in terms of marketing and different business related courses. There's some awesome opportunities there in Lyrics. And then Saylor has a lot of the advertising, marketing, business law, ethics, management, leadership. That's another good one for some of those subject areas too. So those are some good things to explore. Again, thinking of the concept of, you're not looking for one, and maybe you find it. And Mark said, they've found some good resources that as a whole address everything they need, and maybe you're going to find that. But you may have to, pull a chapter or two from this book and pull a chapter or two from this book. And the good thing about that is, with these being open, there is no cost to that in terms of cost to the student. Now, there is a cost in terms of the institution of your time and your effort and everything else. But in terms of saving the student money, as you save more students money, they're going to be able to take more courses. You're going to have an opportunity to bring in more students that may not have had that opportunity before, that may have had financial concerns. There are a couple other resources that I wanted to bring up and show, and so I will see if I've got my screen working okay now, so let me see if I can bring it up. So I am on the Mitchell Library page, and if I scroll down through the list, one of the things that I wanted to, I'll just type it in on the page. It worked before, now to get you there, it'll probably stop working. NC Live is a resource that you can use while that's loading. The other thing I want to show you, if it works, if I go in Moodle and try to create a learning activity, okay, if I'm inside the library site, if I go to databases and resources, you have access to NC Live if it comes up, which is another really good resource. And again, I put my machine on the spot. So I'll add some information and share it out about NC Live. The other thing that I was going to share is inside the LMS, you now have access to what's called Open NCCC. It is what replaced the old NC Lore, and those two resources are not primarily focused on open textbooks, but they are focused on open educational activities and content that you can add into your course. I'm not sure what is going on with my page. You can see one of them actually did load and then it stopped loading, so I guess it's decided that it doesn't want to have the spotlight. But again, if you go to the library site and go to databases and resources, you can find on the list NC Live is a resource that you can go to and use. So I hope that at this point in time, that's most of what I had to share. I hope that I'm glad to hear some of the OER work that's already being done. It does not take open educational resources to have a high quality course, but it does, it does save you some time and effort in multiple ways, and it does assist our students financially and in different ways when we start to utilize more of these resources in our course. A hardback textbook has a publication date that after a while that goes out of date, but with most of the resources we saw today, they're being maintained. Even if it was published, say like the one we looked at for anatomy and physiology in 2013, it's constantly been updated since 2013. With a paper-based textbook, they're not going to go back through and republish that 1 year, the next year, and so forth. Once it's published, it's published, and you get what you get until they come out with a second edition or a third edition, fourth edition, and so forth. So there are lots of benefits, and when it comes to learning activities, I didn't focus specifically on, like, here is how you create a discussion forum, here's how you grade a discussion forum. We'll talk about more of the rubrics and the assessment piece in the next session, in session 5. But I wanted to give you the foundation for creating those items in terms of content and questioning here, and then we'll talk more of the other piece in the assessment parts or the learning assessments in the next session. So I think that's about it for today. Does anyone else have anything? Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to share? Did anyone else have any other comments?
Christina, if you want to put in a ticket, DL fact staff at mitchellcc.edu, we can forward that on to Beverly and see if we can get that figured out for you. You're welcome.
And if for some reason we can't get it figured out, put in the plugged up, Melissa has multiple paper copies that are still available for those in all of the different textbooks that are out there. There are still plenty of those available if you want to check those out and use the paper versions too. I did, and I can't get back to it now to show, but when you go into this week's, or the session 4 page inside the online development course in Moodle, you'll see a list of readings. The other thing that I like to do, an example of if I were using multiple resources, rather than just link to or list the resources, I go into each resource, find the specific pages that relate to the topic that's being discussed, and add those. You'll find that there's one book in there that I did go through and say, you know, look through this entire book because it's loaded. Like, there were so many different things that tied into what we were talking about today that it would have taken pages for me to pull those individually out. But other than that, I picked individual sections or chapters and shared those specific page numbers. Paul, you had a question?
Yeah, because we are moving so much to online so quickly, and this might, I don't know if this would apply, but how much can we get away with copying a chapter out of a textbook and scanning it in and putting it online?
So there are a couple things with that. So one of the things is that Melissa and I have already talked about it, and separate from this training series, I'm working on in the background a copyright, fair use, and Teach Act presentation type session that we hope to get developed and out to faculty. So that we'll talk a lot about that inside of there.
Okay.
But along with that, the other thing, when you talked about ADA compliance too, when you do that, depending on, so if the copyright says you can do that for, sometimes it's a certain percentage of the resource. It depends on where the resource comes from. So we can go down a huge rabbit hole. But for this next part, I want to assume that I've gotten permission and that I'm able to say, take one chapter and share it that way with my students in a controlled environment. You would have to make sure that you're scanning it correctly, because when you scan as a PDF, it will either create it as an image where all the text is embedded and that it is not ADA compliant or accessible, or there's you can, if you're using a traditional scanner, there's software on it that says, you know, create a searchable PDF or a readable PDF. Then you would use that and put in there. So there are some times where that would be acceptable, but there's a lot of pieces that would have to fall into place to make that happen.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because whenever I was in graduate school, I never bought a textbook. We were always given e-reserves.
Right. Now, so if there's a specific article, like if I'm just talking like a single article out of an entire piece of work, then the chances are, the likelihood that I could use that in that manner are fairly high. But if we're talking like an entire textbook, or we're talking like an entire chapter, then I'm actually taking money away from the person who, so that's where this whole conversation ends up going into. That becomes a way where I'm taking away from money that the person who wrote and sells the book, and then I start getting into copyright issues. But we are working on some stuff where we'll talk about that more. I know that that's a focus that's been in there, but we'll talk about a lot of that in that copyright session that I'm putting together.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it may have just been at the certain time, Christina, that you were trying to access it, that, you know, the site itself, or like My Machine, something might have been going on, who knows. But go ahead and put the ticket in like Melissa said, and we can see what's going on there and check with the library. Any other questions, thoughts before we wrap up? I appreciate everyone's time. I look forward to the discussion. So normally we would have continued filling out that table that we've been doing in the discussion forums for sessions 2, 3, and 4. But this week, for this session, instead of doing that, I really want you to, in order to participate in the discussion, I'm just asking you to explore more in depth the resources we looked at today. See if you can find something that's usable, kind of share the pluses, the deltas, all that type of stuff, and kind of start going in that direction. But hope you saw something that you can use today. Appreciate you taking your time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I'll be here for a couple more minutes if you have questions. But thank you all for attending.